Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The Graveyard Meeting. The iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery creaked in protest as Lila Bennett pushed them open with her shoulder, one arm cradling her infant daughter against her chest. A veil of mist hung over the grounds, softening the harsh reality of granite headstones and wilting flowers. The November air bit through her black wool coat as she navigated the winding path to the fresh grave in the eastern section. 30 days, 1 month since Owen's heart had failed him without warning. An aneurysm that struck while she delivered their daughter into the world. 1 month of sleepless nights, of answering condolences with hollow thanks, of searching for her husband's features in their newborn's face. She stopped before the temporary marker. Owen Michael Bennett, beloved husband and father. The father part felt particularly cruel. He had held that title for mere minutes before it was severed from him forever. "I brought her to meet you," Lila whispered, shifting Ivy in her arms so the baby faced the grave. "She's getting bigger every day. The pediatrician says she's thriving." Lila's voice broke on the last word. Thriving. How could their daughter be thriving when her father lay cold in the ground, when her mother could barely remember to eat? The unfairness of it all crashed over her anew, and she sank to her knees on the damp earth, clutching Ivy tighter as tears escaped. "I don't know how to do this alone, Owen," she confessed to the silent stone. "Everything we planned, everything we dreamed about. It wasn't supposed to be just me." Ivy, disturbed by her shuddering breaths, or perhaps sensing her distress, began to wail, a sound that echoed off marble angels and granite crosses, amplifying her failure to comfort even her own child. She tried bouncing her gently, tried humming the lullaby that usually soothed her, but her cries grew more insistent. Her tears fell more freely now, mingling with the first drops of rain that had begun to fall. "Please," she begged, unsure who she was addressing. Owen, God, or the universe itself. "Please, I can't do this alone." The keening of another infant cut through Ivy's cries, startling Lila. She hadn't noticed anyone else in this section of the cemetery. Wiping her eyes hastily, she glanced around and spotted a tall figure several rows away, kneeling before a newer grave. A man, broad-shouldered in a charcoal overcoat, cradling what appeared to be a baby, wrapped in blue. Something about the parallel sight, another parent bringing an infant to a fresh grave, momentarily halted her tears. Their shared circumstance felt like a cosmic cruelty, yet strangely comforting in its confirmation that she wasn't alone in this particular hell. As if sensing her gaze, the man looked up. For a breath, their eyes locked across the weathered headstones between them. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of the same raw grief etched into the lines of their faces. Then, Ivy's cries intensified, the man's baby joined the chorus, and the moment shattered. Lila returned her attention to her daughter, embarrassed by her public breakdown and the connection she'd imagined with a stranger. She fumbled with the diaper bag, searching for Ivy's pacifier, but her trembling hand scattered its contents across the wet grass. Formula, diapers, wipes, and the small stuffed bear Owen had purchased before he died spilled out, instantly dampened by the increasing rainfall. "Here," a deep voice said, startling her. "Let me help." The man she'd noticed was suddenly beside her, balancing his own crying infant in one arm while offering her a handkerchief with his free hand. Up close, she noticed his eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, rimmed red from recent tears. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, accepting the handkerchief. "We're disturbing your visit." "No," he replied, his voice gentle. "I think I was disturbing yours. I recognize the sound of your grief. It matches my own." He gestured toward the grave he'd been visiting. "My wife, Clara. She died during childbirth, exactly a month ago today." His voice caught slightly. "Hemorrhage. They couldn't stop the bleeding." The coincidence stole Lila's breath. "My husband, Owen," she responded, nodding toward the grave. "Aneurysm while I was in delivery, 1 month ago today, as well." They stood in silence as the rain intensified, the weight of their parallel tragedies hanging between them. Their babies continued crying, a duet of innocence untouched by knowledge of their losses. "I'm Gideon," he said finally. "Gideon Holt, and this is Milo, Lila Bennett, and Ivy," she replied. She attempted to gather her scattered belongings one-handed, struggling as the rain plastered her hair to her face. "Here, let me," Gideon offered, crouching to collect the items with his free hand. As he picked up the small stuffed bear, his fingers lingered on it momentarily. "Did he choose this?" he asked quietly. Lila nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Somehow this stranger had intuited the significance of that small toy, that it represented Owen's anticipation, his eager preparation for fatherhood. "I have a collection of fabric swatches at home," Gideon confessed. "Clara was planning to make a quilt for Milo. I can't bring myself to put them away." The rain was falling in earnest now, dampening Ivy's blankets and causing Milo's blue cap to droop over his tiny forehead. Both babies' cries reached fever pitch. "We should get them somewhere dry," Gideon said, handing Lila her belongings. "My car is just through the north gate. I could drive you home if you'd like." Under normal circumstances, Lila would never accept a ride from a stranger. But these circumstances were anything but normal, and something about Gideon Holt's grief-etched face and gentle handling of his son spoke of safety rather than threat. "Thank you," she accepted. "That would be... thank you." As they walked side by side through the rows of graves, sheltering their infants as best they could from the intensifying storm, Lila felt something shift within her, not healing, certainly not happiness, but perhaps the first fragile seedling of what might eventually become hope. In the small parking lot, Gideon unlocked a practical gray SUV and helped her secure Ivy's carrier in the back seat before settling Milo in his own. Once they were in the dry warmth of the vehicle, an unexpected moment of awkwardness descended. "Where am I taking you?" Gideon asked, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "The Bennett estate on Hillcrest Avenue," Lila replied. "I've been staying with my mother-in-law since..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. As Gideon navigated the winding roads leading from the cemetery, they fell into conversation that flowed with surprising ease. She learned he was an architectural designer who worked primarily from home, that Clara had been a wildlife photographer, that they had been married for 5 years before deciding to start a family. She found herself sharing details of her own life, her work as a music teacher, Owen's career in publishing, their renovation of a small cottage they'd never get to raise their daughter in together. When they reached the imposing Victorian mansion where Evelyn Bennett resided, Gideon turned off the engine and reached into his wallet, extracting a business card. "If you ever need anything," he began, then paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "If you ever need to talk to someone who understands this specific situation, someone who won't offer platitudes or expect you to be moving on already..." Lila accepted the card, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you, Gideon Holt," she said softly, "for the ride, and for making me feel less alone, even if just for a moment." She gathered Ivy and her belongings, hurrying through the rain to the grand front door, unaware that this chance encounter in a cemetery would soon become the foundation of an unexpected second chance at love and life. Chapter 2. Rejection and Sanctuary. Lila pushed open the heavy oak door of Evelyn Bennett's Victorian mansion, water dripping from her coat onto the immaculate marble foyer. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock, a silence that had become oppressive over the past month. Ivy squirmed in her arms, her face reddened from crying, her tiny fists balled against the damp blanket. "Is that you, Lila?" Evelyn's voice echoed from the drawing room, its cultured tones carrying their perpetual note of disapproval. "You're dripping water everywhere. Did you forget to take an umbrella again?" Before Lila could respond, she noticed the row of expensive leather suitcases arrayed at the foot of the grand staircase. She recognized them as her own, wedding gifts from Owen's family, used only once for their honeymoon to the Amalfi Coast. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Evelyn appeared in the hallway, her tall, slender figure impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. Despite having no plans to leave the house, her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. At 65, she remained a striking woman, though grief had carved new lines around her mouth and between her brows. "What's all this?" Lila asked, though she already suspected the answer. Evelyn's gaze flickered over Ivy before settling coldly on Lila. "I've had your things packed. It's time for you to leave." The blunt statement, delivered without preamble, stunned Lila into momentary silence. "Leave? But I thought we agreed I would stay until..." "I've reconsidered," Evelyn interrupted, her voice brittle. "It's been a month. The initial shock has passed. I see no reason for you to continue living here." "Where am I supposed to go?" Lila asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Our cottage is rented out until spring, and I haven't been able to return to teaching yet. Ivy is barely a month old. That's hardly my concern, Evelyn replied. You have parents of your own, do you not? Or friends who could accommodate you? I've been more than generous allowing you to remain this long. Lila swallowed hard. Her parents lived overseas, teaching at an international school in Singapore. They had visited briefly after Owen's death, but couldn't extend their stay due to contractual obligations. As for friends, most had drifted away during her pregnancy, uncomfortable with her grief or unsure how to engage with a new widow. Evelyn, please, Lila tried again, bouncing Ivy gently as she began to fuss. Owen would want— Don't presume to tell me what my son would want. Evelyn's composure fractured, her voice rising sharply. If not for this pregnancy, he might still be alive. The stress of impending fatherhood, the extra hours he worked to afford that ridiculous cottage renovation, it all contributed to his condition. The accusation struck Lila like a physical blow. That's not fair, she said. The doctor said the aneurysm could have happened at any time. It was a congenital weakness in the arterial wall, not stress or— Spare me the medical details, Evelyn cut in. I've heard them all. The fact remains that my son is dead, and every time I look at you and that child, I'm reminded of my loss. Ivy is your granddaughter, Lila said softly. She's part of Owen. She's the reason Owen pushed himself beyond his limits. Evelyn turned away, her shoulders rigid with contained emotion. I've arranged for a car service. It will arrive at 6 o'clock to take you wherever you wish to go. I suggest you use the intervening hours to make arrangements. It's already 4:30, Lila protested, glancing at the ornate wall clock. That's barely enough time to— I've been more than fair, Evelyn interrupted again. The rental income from the cottage has been deposited in your account as per Owen's wishes. That should tide you over until you sort yourself out. With those words, she retreated to the drawing room, closing the double doors behind her with quiet finality. Lila stood in the foyer, water still dripping from her coat, her mind racing. The rental income from the cottage would cover perhaps 2 months in a modest apartment, but finding one on such short notice seemed impossible. Most of her savings had gone into the renovation, a project they'd begun with such hope. Ivy began to cry in earnest, hungry after their cemetery visit. Lila carried her upstairs to what had been their temporary bedroom. The space was now stripped of personal touches. No photographs on the dresser, no books on the nightstand, only the essential baby items and her packed luggage remaining. She settled into the armchair by the window, opening her blouse to feed Ivy. As she nursed, she pulled out her phone and began making desperate calls. Her best friend from college was traveling for work. Another friend had just had twins and barely had room for her own family. The few remaining options voiced sympathy but offered only vague promises to ask around. The minutes ticked by with alarming speed as the grandfather clock downstairs chimed 5:30. Lila felt panic rising in her throat. She had nowhere to go, a newborn to care for, and less than 30 minutes before the car arrived. In her desperation, she found herself staring at the business card Gideon Holt had given her earlier. She traced her finger over the embossed lettering, Gideon Holt, Architectural Design, and the phone number beneath. He had offered help if she needed it, but surely he hadn't meant something of this magnitude. They were strangers, connected by nothing more than parallel tragedies. Still, as the minutes continued to slip away, she found herself with diminishing options. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number, unsure what she would say if he answered. After 4 rings, she was about to hang up when his deep voice came through the line. Gideon Holt. It's Lila, she said, her voice smaller than she intended. Lila Bennett, from the cemetery earlier. Lila? He repeated, surprise evident in his tone. Is everything all right? The simple question broke something inside her. No, she admitted, tears threatening again. Everything is very much not all right. She explained her situation in halting sentences, embarrassment coloring her words. I wouldn't ask, but I literally have nowhere else to go tonight. Maybe tomorrow I can figure something out, but with Ivy I just— Where are you now? Gideon interrupted, his voice calm and decisive. Still at my mother-in-law's, but not for much longer. I'm coming to get you, he said without hesitation. Text me the address. Pack whatever you and Ivy need for tonight. We have a guest suite that hasn't been used in months. Are you sure? Lila asked, relief and doubt warring within her. You barely know me. I know enough, Gideon replied simply. You're a mother with an infant who needs shelter for the night. The rest we can figure out tomorrow. When Lila hung up, she felt a curious mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Accepting help from a virtual stranger went against every cautionary instinct, yet something about Gideon Holt inspired trust. Perhaps it was the shared experience of their losses, or the gentle way he'd handled his son. Whatever the reason, his offer represented her only viable option. She dressed Ivy in warm clothes and packed a diaper bag with essentials. The rest would have to remain in storage until she found permanent lodging. As she zipped the final bag, a text arrived from Gideon, 10 minutes away. Lila carried Ivy in her overnight bag downstairs. Evelyn emerged from the drawing room at the sound of her footsteps, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "You found accommodations already?" she asked, eyeing the single bag. "Yes," Lila replied, unwilling to elaborate. "The rest of my things can remain here temporarily." Evelyn conceded, a hint of discomfort in her expression. "I'll have them moved to the garage. You can arrange to collect them when you're settled." A car pulled into the circular driveway, its headlights illuminating the rain-slicked cobblestones. Lila recognized Gideon's gray SUV. "Your car service is early," Evelyn observed, moving to peer through the side window. "It's not a service," Lila said, gathering her courage. "It's a friend." Evelyn's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." For a moment, Lila thought she detected a flicker of concern in her mother-in-law's expression. Perhaps worry that she'd acted too hastily, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the same cool detachment that had characterized their interactions since Owen's death. "Goodbye, Evelyn," Lila said, shifting Ivy to her shoulder. "I'll contact you about visiting arrangements with Ivy once I'm settled." "That won't be necessary," Evelyn replied stiffly. "I'll have my solicitor draw up a formal visitation schedule." Lila nodded, too exhausted for further confrontation. She stepped into the rain without Evelyn offering to help with her bag or to say goodbye to her granddaughter. The door closed behind her with a definitive click before she reached the bottom step. Gideon emerged from the driver's side, an umbrella in hand. He met her halfway up the path, sheltering her and Ivy from the downpour as he took her bag. His face registered concern, but he asked no questions, simply guided her to the passenger seat and ensured she and Ivy were settled before loading her bag. As they pulled away from the Bennett estate, Lila watched the imposing house recede in the side mirror, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the coldness within. She felt Gideon's gaze on her profile, but kept her eyes fixed on the diminishing image. "Thank you," she said finally when the house had disappeared around a bend. "I know this is imposing, terribly, but I promise it's just for tonight. Let's not worry about time frames right now," Gideon replied, his focus returning to the rain-soaked road. "You and Ivy need a safe place. I have room. The rest can be sorted out when you've had a chance to breathe." As they drove through the darkening evening toward his home, Lila felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. Yet beneath the exhaustion and uncertainty, a small ember of something like hope flickered to life. For the first time since Owen's death, someone had offered help without obligation or judgment. A simple human kindness when she needed it most. She glanced at Gideon's profile, illuminated briefly by passing streetlights. What twist of fate had placed him in the cemetery at the exact moment she'd needed someone to witness her grief? And what further coincidence had made him available when she found herself homeless hours later? The questions swirled in her mind as they continued toward an unknown future, the windshield wipers keeping a steady rhythm like a metronome, counting beats in a composition yet to be written. Chapter 3. The Oppressive Household. Gideon's SUV cut through sheets of rain, windshield wipers working furiously as they navigated the winding road toward the outskirts of town. Lila cradled Ivy against her chest, her mind still reeling from Evelyn's abrupt eviction. The baby had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her tiny features peaceful in sleep, despite the tumult surrounding her young life. "We're almost there," Gideon said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Just beyond those trees." Layla followed his gesture to where a modern farmhouse emerged through the downpour, its warm lights glowing like beacons against the darkening sky. The structure blended traditional elements with contemporary design, clearly the work of an architect with an appreciation for history. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the clean lines and thoughtful proportions. "Thank you," Gideon replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "It was my first major renovation project. Clara and I bought it as a dilapidated farmhouse 6 years ago. We lived in the barn conversion during the reconstruction. His voice softened at the mention of his late wife, but Lila noticed he spoke her name without the raw pain she still felt when mentioning Owen. They pulled into a circular driveway and Gideon cut the engine. "Wait here," he instructed, grabbing an umbrella from the back seat. He circled the vehicle and opened her door, sheltering Lila and Ivy as they made their way to the covered porch. Before Gideon could reach for his keys, the front door swung open. A tall, elegant woman in her late 60s stood in the entryway, her silver blonde hair cut in a sleek bob that accentuated her aristocratic features. She wore tailored black trousers and a cashmere sweater, an outfit too formal for a quiet evening at home. Her attention fixed immediately on Lila and the bundle in her arms. "Gideon, you're late. Milo has been—" She broke off, her gray eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" "Mother, this is Lila Bennett and her daughter Ivy," Gideon explained, ushering Lila into the warm foyer. "Lila, this is my mother, Beatrice Holt." Beatrice's posture stiffened further, if that were possible. "I see. And what is Miss Bennett doing in our home at this hour?" Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the awkwardness of the situation. Before she could formulate a response, Gideon spoke. "Lila needs a place to stay tonight. She and Ivy will be using the guest suite." His tone was firm, brooking no argument, though his expression remained neutral. Beatrice's lips pressed into a thin line. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," she suggested, her gaze sliding dismissively over Lila. "There's nothing to discuss," Gideon replied, taking Lila's overnight bag from her shoulder. "Lila, let me show you to your room. You must be exhausted." He guided her toward a hallway off the main living area, leaving Beatrice standing rigidly in the foyer. Lila could feel the older woman's disapproving gaze boring into her back. The guest suite occupied a private wing of the house, separated from the main living areas by a short corridor. Gideon opened the door to reveal a spacious room with a queen-sized bed, a comfortable sitting area, and an ensuite bathroom. The decor was understated but elegant. Cream walls, navy accents, and warm wood tones. "The bathroom has everything you should need," Gideon explained, setting her bag on a luggage rack. "There's a mini fridge under the console table with water and snacks for Ivy." He hesitated, then moved to a closet, retrieving a portable bassinet. "We bought this for when Clara's sister visited with her baby last year. It should work for tonight." Lila's throat tightened at this unexpected thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she managed. "This is more than generous." Gideon ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "I should check on Milo. He's probably giving my mother a hard time." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Are you hungry? I could bring something, once you're settled." "I'm fine, really," Lila assured him, though she couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. "You've done more than enough." He nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. "If you need anything, my room is at the end of the main hallway. Just make yourself at home, okay?" After Gideon left, Lila stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. She gently laid Ivy in the bassinet, changed into dry clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed. Exhaustion crashed over her in waves, but her racing mind prevented sleep. What was she doing here, in a stranger's home with her infant daughter? How had her life unraveled so completely in just 30 days? She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. She couldn't afford another breakdown. Ivy needed her to be strong, to make rational decisions. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Expecting Gideon, she was surprised to find Beatrice in the doorway, holding a tray with a steaming bowl of soup and a slice of bread. "You should eat something," the older woman said stiffly, placing the tray on the console table. Her gaze drifted to Ivy, sleeping in the bassinet, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," Lila replied, unsure how to navigate this tentative olive branch. Beatrice remained by the door, making no move to leave. "How did you meet my son?" she asked abruptly. The question carried undercurrents of suspicion that Lila didn't miss. "At the cemetery, actually, this afternoon. We were both visiting our spouses." She stumbled over the final word. "I see." Beatrice's gaze sharpened. "And within hours, you've managed to secure an invitation to our home." Heat flooded Lila's cheeks. "It wasn't like that. My mother-in-law asked me to leave, and I had nowhere else to go. Gideon offered the guest room for tonight. I'll be looking for an apartment tomorrow." Beatrice studied her with clinical detachment. "My son is vulnerable right now, Ms. Bennett. His judgment may be impaired by grief. I hope you understand that." The implication was clear. Beatrice viewed her as a potential threat, perhaps even an opportunist. Under different circumstances, Lila might have been offended. Instead, she felt an unexpected flood of empathy. Beatrice was protecting her son, just as Lila would protect Ivy from perceived threats. "I understand your concern," Lila said quietly. "Gideon has been extraordinarily kind, offering shelter to someone he barely knows. I promise I have no intention of taking advantage of that kindness." Beatrice's expression remained skeptical. "My son has a generous heart, sometimes too generous." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You should know that Gideon is still deeply in love with Clara. Her death hasn't changed that fact." "I wouldn't expect it to," Lila replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "Just as my husband's death hasn't changed my love for him." Something flickered in Beatrice's eyes, perhaps surprise at Lila's directness or reluctant recognition of a shared understanding. Without another word, she turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. That night, both babies woke simultaneously around midnight. Lila emerged from the guest suite with Ivy to find Gideon in the kitchen, attempting to prepare a bottle for Milo with one hand while holding his fussing son in the other. "Need help?" Lila offered, adjusting Ivy against her shoulder. Gideon looked up, relief evident in his expression. "Please, I'm still mastering the one-handed bottle preparation." Lila took Milo from him with practiced ease, balancing both infants as Gideon efficiently prepared 2 bottles. The domestic scene felt surprisingly natural despite their short acquaintance. 2 new parents helping each other through the challenging nighttime hours. "Your mother thinks I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability," Lila said as they settled at the kitchen island, each feeding a baby. Gideon's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Beatrice is protective by nature. She moved in after Clara died to help with Milo, but her assistance comes with strong opinions attached. "She loves you," Lila observed. "She's afraid you'll be hurt again." "Perhaps," Gideon acknowledged, "but she forgets that I'm 35, not 16. I'm capable of making my own decisions." He glanced at Lila. "I hope her concerns didn't make you uncomfortable." "No more than this entire situation already has," Lila replied with unexpected honesty. "I never imagined being homeless with a 1-month-old, dependent on a stranger's kindness." "We're not exactly strangers anymore," Gideon pointed out gently. "Not after today." The simple observation resonated with Lila. Their shared grief had accelerated intimacy that might otherwise have taken months to develop. There was something about parallel tragedy that created immediate understanding words couldn't adequately express. Chapter 4. Rhythm and Routine. Morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. Lila awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting the previous day's upheaval. The luxurious guest bed with its crisp linens was a stark contrast to the austere room she'd occupied at Evelyn's house. For a fleeting moment, she imagined Owen beside her, the past month merely a nightmare from which she'd finally awakened. Reality reasserted itself when Ivy's hungry cries pierced the silence. Lila glanced at her watch. 6:17 a.m. A full hour longer than her daughter typically allowed her to sleep. She lifted her from the bassinet, noting with surprise that her diaper was fresh. Someone had changed her during the night without waking her. After feeding Ivy, Lila dressed in her only clean outfit and ventured cautiously into the main part of the house. The kitchen was empty but showed signs of recent activity. A coffee pot half full, a bottle soaking in the sink. She found a note propped against a mug on the counter, written in an architect's precise hand. "Help yourself to breakfast. Working in my studio behind the house. B has taken Milo to his morning appointment. G." The absence of Beatrice's intimidating presence allowed Lila to breathe more freely. She prepared a simple breakfast of toast and fruit, then settled at the kitchen island with Ivy in her lap to make calls about apartment rentals. The first 3 agencies had nothing immediately available that met her modest budget. The 4th suggested a basement unit that wouldn't be ready for 3 weeks. "Problem?" Gideon's voice startled her as he entered through the back door. He wore jeans and a paint-spattered Henley, a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Housing options are limited," Lila admitted, ending her call, "especially ones that don't require first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit up front." Gideon nodded, pouring himself coffee. "The rental market here is brutal. Took Clara and me 6 months to find this place, and it was barely habitable then." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "There's no rush, you know. The guest suite is yours for as long as you need it." Lila shook her head. Your mother made it quite clear last night that my presence isn't welcome. My mother doesn't decide who stays in my home, Gideon replied, his tone firm but not unkind. She moved in temporarily after Clara died to help with Milo. I appreciate her support, but that doesn't give her authority over household decisions. Before Lila could respond, Ivy began to fuss. She bounced her gently, but her complaints intensified. May I? Gideon asked, setting down his coffee. Surprised, Lila handed over her daughter. Gideon cradled Ivy with practiced ease, speaking to her in the soft, slightly elevated tone that seemed instinctive when addressing infants. Ivy's cries subsided almost immediately as she studied this new face with solemn curiosity. She likes you, Lila observed, watching her daughter grasp Gideon's finger. We understand each other, Gideon replied with a small smile. Fellow travelers on the same journey. He returned his attention to Lila. Here's a suggestion. Stay through the weekend. Use my home office to make calls and search for apartments without Beatrice hovering. By Monday, you'll either have found suitable accommodation or we can revisit this conversation. The practical proposal made sense, yet Lila hesitated. I don't want to create tension between you and your mother. That tension existed long before you arrived, Gideon assured her. Beatrice and I have a complicated history, but we're both adults capable of managing our disagreements. He handed Ivy back, their fingers brushing momentarily during the transfer. In the meantime, two single parents helping each other hardly seems controversial. Something in his tone, a blend of determination and vulnerability, weakened Lila's resistance. Through the weekend, she agreed cautiously, and I insist on contributing somehow, cooking, cleaning, whatever would be helpful. Deal, Gideon replied, his expression lightening. Though I should warn you, I'm a decent cook but a terrible housekeeper. The opportunity for improvement is substantial. The rest of the day established a pattern that would sustain them through subsequent weeks. While Gideon worked in his studio, Lila tackled the kitchen, bringing order to the chaos of a house managed by a grieving father and his well-meaning but domestically challenged mother. She discovered forgotten groceries in the refrigerator and transformed them into a hearty soup that simmered throughout the afternoon, filling the house with comforting aromas. Beatrice returned with Milo shortly before dinner, her expression souring when she found Lila settled at the kitchen island, laptop open to apartment listings while Ivy napped nearby. Still here, I see, she observed coolly. Mother, Gideon's warning tone preceded his entrance from the back hallway. Lila is staying through the weekend while she arranges more permanent housing. Beatrice's lips thinned in disapproval, but she refrained from direct confrontation. Instead, she focused on Milo, who had begun to fuss in his carrier. He's overtired, Beatrice announced. I'll take him upstairs for his nap. Actually, Gideon countered, lifting his son with gentle confidence, it's past his feeding time. I'll handle it. As Beatrice swept from the room, radiating displeasure, Lila busied herself with the soup to avoid acknowledging the tension. Gideon settled at the table with Milo, expertly balancing him while preparing a bottle. Sorry about that, he said once Beatrice's footsteps had faded. She's always been protective, but Clara's death has intensified that tendency. She loves you, Lila replied, stirring the soup thoughtfully. She's afraid you'll be hurt again. Gideon tested the formula temperature with practiced efficiency. Perhaps, but she's forgetting that I'm 35, not 16. I'm capable of making my own decisions, including who I welcome into my home. That evening established another pattern. Dinner shared at the kitchen island after the babies were settled, conversations flowing more easily than either expected. Lila learned that Gideon had studied architecture at Cornell, that he specialized in restoring historic properties while incorporating sustainable elements, that he and Clara had met during a renovation project at the Wildlife Conservation Center where she volunteered. In turn, she shared her background in music education, her childhood in Vermont, how she'd met Owen at a publishing conference where she was pitching a children's songbook. These exchanges, initially tentative, gradually built a foundation of comfortable familiarity between them. By Sunday evening, Lila had secured a promising lead on an apartment, though it wouldn't be available for 3 weeks. She was preparing to announce this development to Gideon when Beatrice intervened with unexpected directness. I've been thinking, she began over dinner, her tone suspiciously accommodating. It seems wasteful for Lila to take temporary accommodation when we have perfectly adequate space here. She smiled thinly, and I must admit the house has been more organized since her arrival. Gideon and Lila exchanged startled glances. "That's surprisingly generous, Mother," Gideon said cautiously. "Well," Beatrice continued, cutting her food with precise movements, "it makes practical sense. Lila needs housing, we need assistance with household management, and the babies seem to do better with consistent routines," her gaze fixed on Lila. "I propose an arrangement. Room and board in exchange for household management until you secure permanent housing. Strictly business, of course." The offer, though couched in practical terms, represented a significant shift from Beatrice's previous hostility. Lila suspected ulterior motives. Perhaps Beatrice preferred to keep potential threats where she could monitor them, but the arrangement would solve her immediate housing crisis. "That's very kind," Lila replied carefully. "But I wouldn't want to impose further—" "It's hardly an imposition if you're providing a service in exchange," Beatrice countered smoothly. "And it would allow you to save the money you'd otherwise spend on temporary accommodations. I assume finances are a concern at present." The pointed reference to her financial vulnerability stung, but Lila kept her expression neutral. "I'll consider it. Thank you." Later, after Beatrice retired, Gideon found Lila in the kitchen preparing bottles for the night. "You don't have to accept my mother's offer," he said without preamble. Her delivery was tactless, but the core idea has merit. "This arrangement has been working, hasn't it?" Lila considered the past 3 days, the surprising ease with which they developed complementary routines, the quiet companionship of shared meals, the relief of having another adult who understood the unique challenges they both faced. "It has," she acknowledged, "but I don't want charity." "It's not charity if you're contributing," Gideon countered, echoing his mother's point in a gentler tone. "You've brought order to a house that desperately needed it. You've cooked actual meals instead of the takeout we've subsisted on." He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. "And having someone around who understands this specific type of grief without needing explanations, that's valuable beyond measure." His honesty disarmed her final reservations. "All right," she agreed. "A temporary arrangement until I find something permanent. And I insist on contributing to groceries and utilities." "Deal," Gideon replied, relief evident in his expression. "Though I should warn you, Beatrice doesn't relinquish kitchen territory easily. Prepare for ongoing negotiations regarding meal preparation." His attempt at humor lightened the moment, but as Lila returned to her guest suite later that evening, she couldn't help wondering if she'd made a wise decision. The practical benefits were undeniable, yet she sensed invisible boundary lines being redrawn. Relationships shifting in ways neither she nor Gideon had anticipated. As she settled Ivy for the night, Lila realized with startling clarity that for the first time since Owen's death, she had spent an entire day without being ambushed by crippling grief. The constant ache remained, the absence still profound. But something had changed, a microscopic shift in the weight she carried, as if someone had silently lifted a fraction of her burden without her noticing. Chapter 5. Whispers and Judgments. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Lila pushed Ivy's stroller through Meadowbrook's Central Park, enjoying the crisp autumn air. The temporary solution had evolved into a functional routine with surprising ease. Mornings began with shared coffee while the babies napped. Afternoons found Lila managing household affairs while Gideon worked in his studio. Evenings centered around jointly prepared meals, after which they often sat in comfortable silence, each with their respective infant, occasionally sharing observations about their day. Beatrice maintained a cool civility, neither welcoming nor openly hostile, though her calculating gaze followed Lila's every interaction with Gideon. The older woman had departed that morning for a 3-day Garden Society conference, leaving them to manage alone, for the first time since Lila's arrival. Lila Bennett, an uncertain voice, pulled her from her thoughts. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow music teacher from Meadowbrook Elementary, approached with tentative steps. They'd been friendly colleagues, though never close friends. "Sarah, hello." Lila greeted her with a genuine smile. Human connection beyond the Holt household felt suddenly precious. "I heard about Owen," Sarah said, her expression softening with sympathy. "I've been meaning to reach out, but I wasn't sure—" She trailed off, glancing at Ivy. "Is this your little one?" "Yes, this is Ivy," Lila confirmed, pride momentarily displacing grief as she adjusted the blanket around her daughter. "She's just turned 7 weeks." Sarah bent to admire the baby, making appropriate cooing sounds before straightening with an awkward shift in demeanor. "We've all been wondering how you're doing. There have been story. The hesitation in her tone alerted Lila to underlying gossip. Stories? Sarah glanced around before leaning closer. About your living situation. Evelyn Bennett has been rather vocal at her garden club meetings about you moving in with another man so soon after Owen's passing. Heat flashed across Leila's face. That's not... I'm staying temporarily with a friend while looking for an apartment. Evelyn asked me to leave her home rather abruptly. Of course, Sarah said quickly, though her expression remained dubious. It's just, well, people talk in a small town like this, and when they heard you were living with Gideon Holt... She paused meaningfully. You know Gideon? Leila asked, surprised by the connection. Everyone knows of him, Sarah corrected. His wife's death during childbirth was tragic news. The timing of your arrangement has raised eyebrows. The implication was unmistakable. Evelyn had twisted her temporary housing situation into something sordid, and the town had eagerly consumed the gossip. Lila felt simultaneously exposed and defensive. Gideon offered his guest suite when I had nowhere else to go, she explained, striving for dignity. We're two grieving parents helping each other survive an impossible situation, nothing more. Of course, Sarah repeated, her tone suggesting the opposite. Well, I should let you continue your walk. Give Ivy a kiss from her Auntie Sarah. She squeezed Lila's arm. And don't worry about the talk. People will find something new to discuss eventually. As Sarah walked away, Lila remained rooted to the path, her earlier peace shattered. She'd been naively focused on day-to-day survival, oblivious to how their arrangement might appear to outsiders. Worse, she hadn't considered how such gossip might affect Gideon, who had business relationships throughout the community. Similar uncomfortable encounters punctuated her afternoon errands. At the grocery store, conversations halted when she approached certain aisles. The pharmacist's assistant gave her a disapproving look when she purchased items for both Ivy and Milo. By the time she returned to Gideon's house, no, not his house, she corrected herself mentally, her temporary residence. Lila's emotions had crystallized from embarrassment to indignation. She found Gideon in the kitchen, attempting to prepare dinner with Milo strapped to his chest. The domestic scene, normally comforting in its routine, now carried new implications after the day's revelations. You're back late, he observed, glancing up from dicing vegetables. Everything okay? Lila settled Ivy's carrier on the counter before unpacking groceries with unnecessary force. Did you know the entire town is gossiping about us? Gideon's knife paused mid-chop. Ah, you've had the pleasure of Meadowbrook's rumor mill. You knew? Lila's voice rose slightly, causing Ivy to stir. She lowered her tone. Why didn't you warn me? What exactly would I have warned you about? Gideon asked reasonably. That people with empty lives fill them by dissecting others? That grief makes people uncomfortable, but scandal provides entertainment? His calm response deflated Lila's indignation. I just felt blindsided, she admitted. Sarah Mitchell implied we're having some torrid affair, as if we'd both forgotten our spouses after only weeks. Gideon resumed chopping, his rhythm deliberately measured. Does it matter what they think? Of course it matters, Lila exclaimed. Your reputation, your business. My reputation is built on my work, not town gossip, Gideon interrupted gently. Anyone whose opinion matters knows exactly why you're staying here. But it's not fair to you, Lila persisted. You offered shelter to someone in need, and now people are questioning your character. Gideon set down his knife and faced her directly. Lila, I lost my wife 7 weeks ago. Town gossip ranks extremely low on my list of concerns right now. His expression softened. But if it bothers you, I understand. We can reconsider the arrangement. The thought of leaving, of facing apartment hunting alone, of returning to isolated grieving, sent an unexpected wave of panic through Lila. These past weeks, for all their challenges, had provided structure and human connection when she needed it most. No, she said quietly, unless you want me to go. I don't, he replied, the simple declaration hanging between them. After a pause, he added, whatever this arrangement is, it's working for us. For the babies, that's what matters. They prepared dinner side by side, the earlier tension dissolving into familiar rhythm. Later, after the babies were settled, they sat in the living room with cups of tea, the evening silence comfortable, until Gideon broke it unexpectedly. I should have warned you about Evelyn, he said. She's been spreading versions of her narrative since she saw us together at the pharmacy last week. Lila looked up sharply. You saw her? Gideon nodded. She made her disapproval quite clear, suggesting I was taking advantage of your vulnerable state. His mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Apparently, we're quite the scandal, two grieving spouses finding inappropriate comfort together. That's ridiculous, Lila said automatically, though something in his tone caused warmth to rise to her cheeks. They hadn't discussed the nature of their relationship beyond its practical aspects, both carefully avoiding acknowledgement of the growing comfort they found in each other's presence. Is it? Gideon asked softly. The question hung between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Lila found herself suddenly aware of details she'd been subconsciously cataloging. The way firelight caught gold flecks in his hazel eyes, how his fingers moved with architectural precision, whether handling blueprints or cradling Milo. The low timbre of his voice when speaking late at night. I don't know, she admitted finally. I know it's too soon to even consider anything. I still reach for Owen in my sleep, and I still save articles Clara would find interesting, Gideon acknowledged. We're still married to ghosts. The frank assessment should have created distance, but instead fostered unexpected intimacy, the shared understanding that neither sought to replace what they'd lost, merely to survive what remained. The moment was interrupted by Milo's cries through the baby monitor. Gideon rose, his hand briefly resting on Lila's shoulder as he passed, a touch that might have been casual reassurance, but lingered, just long enough to suggest something more. Alone, Lila confronted feelings she'd been avoiding. Whatever was developing between them defied simple categorization, not romance in any conventional sense, but something equally powerful, a connection forged in parallel grief, in shared responsibility, in mutual understanding, too rare to dismiss. Chapter 6. Memory Boxes. The anniversary of Clara's death approached with the subtlety of an oncoming storm. Gideon grew quieter, his focus drifting during conversations, his gaze lingering on photographs Lila had carefully maintained throughout the house. After 2 months of cautious cohabitation, she recognized the signs of grief resurfacing with renewed intensity. One evening, Gideon disappeared after dinner without explanation. When he hadn't returned after Lila settled both babies for the night, concern drove her to search the house. She found his studio door ajar, soft lamplight spilling onto the hallway floor. She hesitated at the threshold, reluctant to intrude on private grief. Through the gap she could see Gideon seated on the floor, surrounded by photographs, trinkets, and handwritten notes. His shoulders curved inward, head bowed over what appeared to be a wooden box with brass hinges. Gideon, she called softly, knocking gently on the doorframe. He looked up, eyes reddened but dry. Sorry, he said, attempting to gather the scattered items. I lost track of time. Don't apologize, Lila remained in the doorway, respecting the boundary. I was just worried. Gideon gestured for her to enter. I'm making a memory box for Milo, he explained as Lila approached cautiously. Tomorrow would have been Clara's 34th birthday. The revelation explained his recent withdrawal. Lila knelt beside him, taking in the collection. A pressed wildflower, ticket stubs, a beaded bracelet, photographs of a vibrant woman with Gideon's same warm smile. Clara believed in documenting everything, Gideon continued, lifting a small journal with worn edges. She kept these detailed nature journals on every hike, every wildlife sighting. I want Milo to know his mother was more than just, his voice caught, more than just someone who died bringing him into the world. She'll know, Lila assured him, carefully lifting a photograph of Clara cradling her pregnant belly, face radiant with expectation. Through your stories, through these treasures, Gideon traced the edge of a train ticket with his fingertip. Our first date was a day trip to the White Mountains. She packed this ridiculous gourmet picnic but forgot utensils. We ended up eating pâté with tree bark as makeshift spoons. The memory drew a reluctant smile. She said it added authentic terroir. The intimate story created a momentary awkwardness. Lila felt simultaneously privileged to receive this confidence and concerned about intruding on sacred memories. But Gideon's expression held invitation rather than regret, as if sharing these 2 new paragraphs. She would have been an incredible mother, he concluded, placing a small watercolor of mountain laurel into the box. That's the cruelest part. Milo lost someone irreplaceable before ever knowing her. But he has you, Lila reminded him. And you carry Clara with you in everything you do with Milo. Gideon met her gaze, vulnerability naked in his expression. Some days, I worry I'm already forgetting details. The exact pitch of her laugh, the specific way she'd wrinkle her nose when concentrating. What if Milo asks questions someday that I can't answer? The fear struck a chord in Lila's heart. She'd had similar thoughts about Ivy, how much of Owen would remain in her memory as years passed. What essential qualities might fade, leaving her daughter with an incomplete portrait of her father? I should start something similar for Ivy, she mused, fingering the edge of a photograph. Before memories begin to blur. I have extra boxes, Gideon offered immediately. From my restoration salvage collection. There's a mahogany one with mother-of-pearl inlay that would be perfect. His enthusiasm sparked an unexpected project. They relocated to the dining room table, where Gideon produced the promised box. Indeed perfect, with smooth corners and a subtle sheen. Lila retrieved the small collection of mementos she'd managed to salvage from Evelyn's house. Owen's favorite fountain pen, the sonogram from their first ultrasound, the small bear stuffed animal he'd purchased the day they learned Ivy was a girl. They worked side by side, Gideon organizing his collection while Lila began hers, occasionally sharing stories that revealed the essence of the people they'd loved and lost. The parallel activity created intimacy without pressure, allowing grief to exist alongside tentative joy in preserving these memories for their children. Owen collected vintage bookplates, Lila explained, displaying a small leather portfolio. Humans spend hours in antique shops looking for them. Most people thought it was an odd hobby, but he loved the history, imagining all the different hands that had touched these books through decades. Clara would have appreciated that, Gideon replied. She had a similar fascination with bird migration patterns, how certain routes had remained unchanged for centuries despite human development, connections across time. As midnight approached, their collection of stories had created a bridge between past and present, between respective losses that neither could fully comprehend but both could honor. When they finally packed away the boxes, something had shifted between them, a deepened understanding, a shared purpose beyond daily survival. At the hallway junction, where they typically parted for the night, Gideon paused. "Thank you," he said simply, "for understanding why this matters." "Of course it matters," Lila replied. "They matter. Always will." Without premeditation, Gideon leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Brief, chaste, yet startling in its intimacy. He stepped back immediately, uncertainty flickering across his features. "I'm sorry," he began. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Lila interrupted, though her pulse had quickened unexpectedly. "We're friends. Friends comfort each other." The word friends hung between them, simultaneously accurate and insufficient to describe what they had become to each other. Neither moved to close the physical gap again. Yet something had been acknowledged, the possibility that their connection might evolve beyond parallel grief and practical arrangement. "Good night, Lila," Gideon finally said, retreating toward his bedroom. "Good night," she echoed, watching him go before turning toward the guest suite that had begun to feel increasingly like home. Inside her room, as she checked on sleeping Ivy, Lila confronted the complex emotions Gideon's simple gesture had awakened. Not betrayal of Owen's memory, as she might have expected, but rather guilt at its absence. Shouldn't she have felt wrong accepting affection from another man so soon after losing her husband? Why, instead, had it felt like a natural extension of the connection they'd built? The memory of Owen remained vivid, her love for him undiminished. Yet alongside that enduring attachment, something new had taken root. Respect and affection for Gideon that existed not in competition with her feelings for Owen, but parallel to them, as if her heart had developed separate chambers for past and present. Chapter 7. First Steps Forward. 3 months after their chance meeting in the cemetery, Lila and Gideon established a rhythm that blended practicality with growing affection. Their arrangement had evolved beyond mere cohabitation into something neither had anticipated, a partnership that honored their past losses while nurturing tentative hope for the future. Beatrice had departed a week earlier, returning to her own home across town after acknowledging that her constant presence was no longer necessary, though her disapproval of their evolving relationship remained evident in her parting remark that she would return when things had been properly sorted. Her absence allowed a subtle shift in household dynamics, casual touches lingering a moment longer, conversations extending into the night, shared laughter no longer muted by concern for external judgment. On a crisp December morning, Lila entered the kitchen to find Gideon preparing breakfast one-handed, Milo secured against his chest in a carrier. The domestic tableau, his hair still damp from the shower, sleeves rolled to expose forearms dusted with light hair, confident movements as he flipped pancakes, stirred an appreciation that transcended gratitude. "Morning," he greeted her, a smile warming his features. "Coffee's ready." Lila poured herself a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "You're up early?" she observed, noting the stack of pancakes already waiting. "Special occasion. Today marks 3 months since we met," Gideon replied without looking up from the stove. Seemed worth acknowledging. The casual commemoration caught Lila by surprise. She hadn't tracked the date, yet Gideon had, a detail that spoke volumes about his attention to their evolving connection. 3 months, she echoed softly. "Sometimes it feels much longer." "In grief time, maybe it is," he suggested, transferring the final pancake to the stack. "We've compressed years of ordinary friendship into weeks of extraordinary circumstances." The assessment felt accurate. Their shared experiences, parallel loss, new parenthood, navigating judgment, had accelerated intimacy that might otherwise have developed over years. As they settled at the kitchen island, Ivy still sleeping in her bassinet nearby, Lila considered how profoundly her life had transformed since that rainy day in the cemetery. "I have something for you," Gideon said, sliding a small wrapped package across the counter. "Nothing elaborate, just something I thought might be useful." Lila unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound planner embossed with her initials. Inside, Gideon had noted important dates: Ivy's upcoming doctor appointments, a reminder about renewing her teaching certification, even Owen's birthday, marked with a small star. "You mentioned wanting to get reorganized before considering returning to teaching," he explained, suddenly appearing uncertain. "I thought this might help track everything." The thoughtfulness of the gift, practical yet personal, embodied what had drawn them together. Not grand romantic gestures, but attentive care expressed through daily consideration. "It's perfect," she assured him, running her fingers over the supple leather. "Though I'm embarrassed I didn't realize the significance of today." "It's not really about the date," Gideon clarified. "More about acknowledging that whatever this is between us, it matters. It's not temporary or transitional, at least not to me." His directness invited reciprocal honesty. "Not to me either," Lila admitted. "Though I'm still trying to reconcile how quickly it developed. Sometimes I feel guilty for not grieving Owen longer before finding contentment again." "I understand," Gideon nodded. "I've wondered if I'd dishonor Clara by moving forward so soon. But lately I've been thinking, perhaps the capacity to connect again so quickly speaks to the quality of love we experienced before. They taught us how to love deeply, how to build partnership. Those lessons didn't die with them." The perspective resonated deeply with Lila. Before she could respond, Ivy's morning babble alerted them to her awakening. As she lifted her from the bassinet, she noticed Gideon watching them with unguarded affection. "She's grown so much," he observed. Both of them have. Indeed, the infants who had brought them together as helpless newborns had developed distinct personalities over the past 3 months. Milo, now 16 weeks, had Clara's determined expression and Gideon's contemplative gaze. Ivy had recently discovered her hands, staring in fascination at her fingers for extended periods. After breakfast, they migrated to the living room for what had become their morning ritual, spreading a blanket on the floor where both babies could practice tummy time. Gideon and Layla sat on opposite sides, encouraging their respective children while maintaining conversation that flowed between practical matters and deeper reflections. "I've been thinking about your teaching certification," Gideon mentioned as he dangled a colorful toy above Milo. "The elementary school will have openings for the fall semester. Ms. Pendleton mentioned it when I ran into her at the hardware store." Lila looked up, surprised. "You asked about teaching positions?" "I mentioned you were considering returning to work eventually," he clarified. "She remembered you from district workshops, said you were brilliant with the youngest students." The compliment warmed Lila, though returning to teaching raised logistical questions she'd been avoiding. "I'd need childcare for Ivy." "We could work something out," Gideon suggested casually, though his tone carried deeper implications. "My schedule is flexible, and the playroom renovation will be finished by then." The reference to future arrangements, casually assumed rather than tentatively proposed, reflected how thoroughly entwined their lives had become. Lila had abandoned apartment hunting weeks ago, her possessions gradually migrating from the guest suite into shared spaces. Neither had formally acknowledged this evolution, yet both acted upon its reality daily. Their comfortable moment was interrupted by a distinctive sound from Ivy, a frustrated grunt followed by determined movement. Lila watched in astonishment as her daughter, previously content with limited mobility, suddenly pushed herself forward with unexpected strength. Not quite crawling, but deliberate movement with clear intention. "Gideon, look!" she exclaimed, reaching for her phone to capture the milestone. But Ivy had other plans. Instead of continuing her forward momentum, she pivoted with surprising coordination and propelled herself toward Gideon. Both adults watched in amazement as the baby determinedly inched across the blanket, her destination unmistakable. When Ivy reached Gideon's knee, her tiny fingers grasping the fabric of his jeans, an extraordinary transformation crossed Gideon's features. Wonder, followed by uncertainty. He glanced at Lila, clearly seeking permission for his emotional response to this significant moment. "She likes you best in the mornings," Lila said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "She associates you with breakfast and music." "Permission granted." Gideon gently lifted Ivy, settling her on his lap with natural ease. "Hey there, adventurer," he murmured, voice rough with suppressed feeling. "That was quite a journey." The simple interaction crystallized something Lila had been gradually acknowledging. Gideon had become more than a housemate or friend to Ivy. He had become a consistent, loving presence in her daughter's life. The realization provoked neither jealousy nor guilt, but profound gratitude. "She knows you're safe," she said, the simple truth resonating beyond the immediate moment. Their eyes met over the babies, unspoken understanding passing between them. Whatever label society might apply to their relationship, they had become family in the ways that mattered most, through daily care, consistent presence, and genuine affection that extended to each other's children. That night, for the first time, Lila didn't return to the guest suite that had been her sanctuary for months. Instead, she followed Gideon to his bedroom, their newfound intimacy extending naturally to sharing this most private space. As they lay together, not yet ready for physical intimacy, but craving the comfort of closeness, Lila realized how completely their lives had intertwined. As she drifted toward sleep, her phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn, the first contact since their confrontation 3 months earlier. The message was brief but consequential. "I've consulted with my attorney about grandparental rights to Ivy. We should discuss this formally." The cold words shattered the warmth of the evening's connection. Lila's hand trembled as she set down the phone, unwilling to contaminate this peaceful moment with Evelyn's hostility. But Gideon, ever attentive, had noticed her distress. "What is it?" he asked, propping himself on one elbow. She showed him the message, wordlessly. His expression hardened as he read it, protective instinct visible in the set of his jaw. "She can't just take her," he stated firmly, handing back the phone. "You're her mother." "But she has resources I don't," Lila replied, voicing her deepest fear. "Money, connections, legal teams, and if she presents our living arrangement as evidence of instability or moral failing, then we'll face it together," Gideon interrupted, his voice steady with certainty. "Whatever she throws at us, we'll handle it as a united front." The simple declaration, "we," rather than "you," conveyed commitment deeper than their tentative romantic exploration. Gideon was offering not just emotional support, but partnership in the challenges ahead. Chapter 8. Legal Battles. A Petition for Grandparental Visitation Rights. Lila stared at the legal documents spread across the kitchen island, her voice barely above a whisper. The formal letterhead of Harrington and Associates, Evelyn's attorneys, seemed to mock her with its embossed gold lettering and imposing language. Gideon stood beside her, scanning the petition with narrowed eyes. "This is more than visitation," he observed, pointing to a highlighted section. "She's requesting partial custody every other weekend plus 2 weeknights." "She's claiming I'm emotionally unstable." Lila's voice broke as she read further, "that my hasty cohabitation demonstrates impaired judgment and moral failing detrimental to Ivy's development." The clinical assessment of her grief and subsequent choices felt like a physical blow. "We knew this was coming," Gideon reminded her, his hand finding hers beneath the counter. "We've already spoken to Catherine about representation." Catherine Whitman, a family law attorney Gideon had worked with on a renovation project, had agreed to meet them later that day. She'd been cautiously optimistic during their initial phone consultation, though she hadn't yet seen the full petition. What if she's right? Lila voiced her deepest fear. What if moving in with you so quickly really was irresponsible? What if a judge agrees? Look at me, Gideon said firmly, waiting until Lila met his gaze. What we've created here is stable, loving, and healthy for both Ivy and Milo. Any objective observer would see that. His certainty steadied her, though the weight of Evelyn's accusations still pressed heavily. Catherine's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian near the courthouse. The attorney herself defied Lila's expectations. A woman in her late 50s, with a streak of purple in her gray bob, and chunky artisanal jewelry that clinked softly as she reviewed the petition. Evelyn has engaged Preston Harrington, Catherine noted, tapping the signature at the bottom of the document. Aggressive, traditional, expensive, loves cases that allow him to make moral pronouncements from his self-constructed pedestal. Is that bad for us? Lila asked, anxiety sharpening her tone. Catherine considered the question thoughtfully. It means they'll leverage conservative family values and traditional timelines for grief and relationship development. They'll frame your living arrangement as impulsive and potentially harmful to Ivy. She set down the petition. But their position has significant weaknesses, primarily that Evelyn has no history of consistent involvement in Ivy's life before making this claim. She kicked Lila out the day of her son's funeral, Gideon interjected, indignation coloring his words. Literally put her belongings on the porch and forced her and Ivy onto the street, which is precisely the kind of detail that undermines her claim of concern for Ivy's welfare, Catherine replied with a satisfied nod. Judges tend to be skeptical of grandparents who suddenly develop passionate interest in grandchildren they previously showed little concern for. The meeting continued with Catherine outlining their strategy, emphasizing the stable home environment Lila and Gideon had created, documenting Evelyn's previous rejection, and presenting their relationship as a thoughtful partnership between grieving parents, rather than an impulsive romance. Should we downplay our personal relationship? Lila asked hesitantly. Focus solely on the practical aspects of our living arrangement. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. Authenticity matters more than conforming to arbitrary timelines. If your relationship has developed romantic elements, acknowledge that, while emphasizing how it enhances rather than detracts from the stability you provide for both children. As they left the office, Gideon took Lila's hand, anchoring her against the swirling uncertainty the petition had unleashed. We'll get through this, he promised. Together. The word together had acquired layers of meaning over their 4 months of shared life. Practical partnership, emotional support, and increasingly, romantic commitment. Though they'd moved cautiously in physical intimacy, their emotional connection had deepened with surprising speed. The following weeks brought a flurry of preparations for the preliminary hearing. Catherine helped them document the progression of their relationship, emphasizing the parallel timing of their losses, the practical considerations that initiated their living arrangement, and the deliberately thoughtful pace of their personal involvement. Simultaneously, they received sworn statements from the pediatrician attesting to Ivy's excellent health and development, character references from colleagues at the music school where Lila had begun teaching part-time, and a brief but significant letter from Richard Winters, Clara's father, confirming his support of Gideon and Lila's relationship as beneficial to his grandson. The night before the hearing, after settling both babies, Lila found Gideon in his studio, reviewing their documentation one final time. His focused determination had been her lifeline during the legal preparations, his unwavering belief in their family unit sustaining her through moments of doubt. Catherine thinks we're well positioned, she said, perching on the edge of his drafting table. But I keep thinking about facing Evelyn across the courtroom tomorrow. Gideon set aside the papers, giving her his full attention. Whatever happens in that courtroom, we face it as a united front. Evelyn can challenge our choices, but she can't undermine what we've built here, unless we allow doubt to separate us. His certainty reflected the evolution of their relationship, from tentative allies in grief to committed partners. Over 4 months, they had constructed something neither had imagined possible in those early days of devastating loss. A blended family built on mutual understanding, shared purpose, and deepening love. I never expected to fight for the right to build a new life so soon after losing Owen, Lila admitted. Part of me still questions if we move too quickly. The conventional timelines for grief are arbitrary, Gideon replied, echoing Catherine's earlier assurance. What matters is that we've been thoughtful and honest every step of the way, with ourselves, with each other, and with the memory of those we lost. His perspective, as always, provided solid ground beneath her feet. Leela leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, in a gesture that had become their unique form of intimate connection. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she whispered, "know that I wouldn't change our path, even with all its complications. You and Milo have become essential to Ivy and me." Gideon's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "You gave us back our future when all I could see was loss," he murmured. "Whatever judgment Evelyn or the courts might pass, that gift remains undiminished." Morning arrived with crisp winter sunshine that belied the tension gripping both households. They dressed with careful attention, conservative clothing that projected stability without appearing manufactured for the occasion. Beatrice arrived to care for both babies, her support unexpectedly strengthened by the legal challenge they faced. The courthouse loomed impressive against the clear blue sky, its stone facade a visual representation of the institutional authority about to evaluate their unconventional family. Inside, Catherine met them with confident professionalism, briefing them on procedural details while they waited for their case to be called. Evelyn arrived, flanked by Preston Harrington and a younger associate, her elegance weaponized in a tailored suit that screamed old money and established propriety. Her gaze skimmed over Lila with dismissive assessment before landing on Gideon with narrow disapproval. "Lila," she acknowledged stiffly, social training apparently preventing her from ignoring her former daughter-in-law completely. "Evelyn," Lila replied, finding unexpected strength in Gideon's steady presence beside her. "I wish we could have discussed this without legal intervention." "Some matters require formal structure," Evelyn responded, her tone suggesting Lila was naive to think otherwise. Married Senior Director of Education. "Ivy's future is too important for casual arrangements." Before Leela could respond, they were called into the courtroom. Judge Elena Cortez, a woman in her 60s with penetrating dark eyes and salt and pepper hair pulled into a severe bun, presided over the hearing with efficient authority. The proceedings began with opening statement from both attorneys. Preston Harrington presented Evelyn as a grieving mother concerned about her granddaughter's welfare, painting Lila's living arrangement as evidence of emotional instability and questionable judgment. "Mrs. Bennett seeks only to ensure her granddaughter maintains connection with her paternal heritage," Harrington concluded with practiced sincerity, "and to provide stability during a period when her mother appears to be making impulsive decisions, driven by grief, rather than careful consideration of Ivy's needs." Catherine's response was measured but pointed, emphasizing Evelyn's rejection of both Lila and Ivy immediately following Owen's death. "If Mrs. Bennett truly prioritized her granddaughter's welfare, Your Honor, she might have offered support rather than eviction during the most vulnerable period of both their lives." The factual timeline that followed revealed a stark contrast between Evelyn's current claims of concern and her previous actions. When Catherine introduced documentation of Lila's eviction, including text messages from Evelyn explicitly blaming Lila for Owen's death, a subtle shift occurred in Judge Cortez's expression. Evelyn took the stand first, presenting a carefully curated version of events that minimized her initial rejection while emphasizing her subsequent concern about Lila's living situation. Under Catherine's cross-examination, however, cracks appeared in her composed facade. "Did you offer Mrs. Bennett and your granddaughter any financial support after asking them to leave your home?" Catherine asked. "Leela received rental income from the cottage," Evelyn replied stiffly. "She wasn't destitute." "That wasn't my question," Catherine persisted. "Did you personally offer any assistance to your granddaughter and her mother after insisting they vacate your home immediately following your son's funeral?" Evelyn's hesitation spoke volumes. "I was grieving," she finally said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Perhaps I could have managed the situation more delicately." "Yet now, 4 months later, you're requesting court-mandated access to the granddaughter you previously rejected," Catherine observed. "What changed, Mrs. Bennett?" "I learned she had moved in with a man she barely knew," Evelyn replied, righteous indignation temporarily overshadowing her carefully maintained composure. "While still claiming to mourn my son, what kind of example does that set for Ivy?" The raw accusation hung in the courtroom air, its emotional impact temporarily silencing even Catherine. Judge Cortez's gaze shifted between Evelyn and Lila, assessing both women with clinical detachment. When Lila took the stand, she felt momentarily overwhelmed by Evelyn's evident disdain. Then her eyes found Gideon in the gallery, his steady presence reminding her of the family they had built from parallel tragedy. Strength flowed from that connection, allowing her to speak with quiet conviction about their journey. "I loved Owen deeply," she testified, meeting Evelyn's gaze directly. "His death shattered the future we had planned together. When Gideon offered shelter after Evelyn asked us to leave, it was an act of kindness between two people experiencing identical loss, not romance or replacement." Preston Harrington's cross-examination aimed to characterize their relationship as inappropriately hasty, but Lila maintained composed honesty. "Grief doesn't follow conventional timelines," she explained. "Neither does healing. Gideon and I built connection through shared understanding of loss that others couldn't comprehend. That foundation has benefited both Ivy and Milo immeasurably." Gideon's testimony followed, his architectural precision bringing clarity to their complex situation. He detailed Milo's improved development in Lila's presence, the consistent routines they'd established for both children, and the careful steps they'd taken to honor Owen and Clara's memories while building a new family structure. "We've created memory boxes for both children," he explained, his composure momentarily wavering as he described this project, "filled with photographs, letters, and mementos to ensure they know their other parents as people, not just absences." Lila's commitment to preserving Owen's memory for Ivy has been unwavering. Judge Cortez's penetrating questions suggested genuine engagement with the complexities of their situation rather than reflexive judgment based on conventional timelines. When testimony concluded, she announced a brief recess before issuing her preliminary ruling. In the courthouse hallway, Catherine appeared, cautiously optimistic. "Judge Cortez is fair but traditional," she advised. "However, Evelyn's admission about evicting you undermines her claim of consistent concern for Ivy." Preston Harrington approached with professional courtesy, masking obvious strategic intent. "My client would consider a compromise," he offered. "Regular visitation, without overnight stays, supervised initially to rebuild the relationship gradually." The offer, more reasonable than their original petition, suggested Evelyn recognized weaknesses in her position. Before Lila could respond, Gideon interjected with calm authority. "We've never opposed appropriate visitation," he stated. "We object to the claim that our household is somehow detrimental to Ivy's well-being." Harrington's expression revealed calculating assessment. "Perhaps we've been operating from misunderstanding rather than fundamental disagreement," he suggested smoothly. "My client deeply misses her connection to her granddaughter and late son." The strategically employed vulnerability, equating access to Ivy with connection to Owen, struck Lila with unexpected empathy. Despite Evelyn's cruelty during her most vulnerable moment, Lila recognized the older woman's grief as genuine, if poorly expressed. When Judge Cortez recalled them, her ruling reflected nuanced understanding of all perspectives. She granted Evelyn limited visitation rights, Sunday afternoons twice monthly, gradually increasing as Ivy became comfortable, while firmly rejecting claims that Lila's living arrangement demonstrated parental deficiency. "Grief follows no standardized timeline," Judge Cortez noted, echoing Lila's earlier testimony. "The court finds that Mrs. Bennett has created a stable, nurturing environment for her daughter despite extraordinary challenges. Mr. Holt's household appears to provide consistent support beneficial to Ivy's development." The mixed victory left both parties with partial satisfaction. As they gathered their documents, Lila noticed Evelyn standing alone, her earlier entourage dispersed to handle procedural details. Without premeditation, Lila approached her former mother-in-law. "I never intended to separate you from Ivy," she said quietly. "She deserves to know her father's family." Evelyn's expression remained guarded, though something flickered beneath her composed surface. Perhaps recognition that their shared connection to Owen constituted a permanent, if complicated, relationship. "She has Owen's smile," she observed after a moment, the simple acknowledgement more revealing than her carefully crafted testimony had been. "Yes," Lila agreed, unexpected tears threatening her composure. "And his curiosity. She examines everything with such concentration." The brief moment of shared recognition didn't resolve their fundamental differences, but established tentative common ground. As they parted without further conversation, Lila sensed a subtle shift. Not reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of mutual accommodation for Ivy's benefit. Outside the courthouse, Gideon waited with patient attention. When Lila reached him, he enfolded her in a protective embrace that conveyed support without words. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair, honest and dignified despite everything. "It's not over," Lila reminded him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "This is just the beginning of navigating Evelyn's involvement." "True," Gideon acknowledged. "But we've established our foundation. Whatever challenges she presents moving forward, we face them together." Chapter 9. Healing Together. The late winter sun cast long shadows across the kitchen as Lila prepared Sunday breakfast, her movements accompanied by Ivy's babbling from her high chair. At 6 months, she had developed an extensive vocabulary of sounds that filled the previously quiet house with joyful noise. Milo, 2 weeks younger but seemingly determined to keep pace, responded with his own melodic coos from his seat beside her. "They're having quite the conversation," Gideon observed, entering with freshly folded laundry. The domestic tableau, pancake batter mixed in the large ceramic bowl, freshly cut fruit arranged on a platter, 2 infants communicating in their private language, represented a normality that had seemed impossible 5 months earlier. "Apparently Ivy has strong opinions about bananas," Lila replied with a smile, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Milo seems unconvinced by her argument." Gideon set down the laundry basket and moved behind Lila, his arms encircling her waist as he rested his chin on her shoulder. These casual intimacies had become part of their daily rhythm, physical affection developing alongside emotional connection, with deliberate care. "Evelyn arrives at 1, he reminded her gently. "Do you want me to take Milo to the park during her visit?" Lila considered the offer, appreciative but determined to normalize these bi-weekly visits. "No, I think it's important for her to see our family as it actually functions. No more pretense." The preliminary custody hearing 2 months earlier had established a fragile truce with Evelyn, supervised visitation that gradually expanded as she demonstrated consistent involvement rather than sporadic interest. These visits remained tense, but Evelyn's genuine attachment to Ivy had begun to transcend her disapproval of Lila's choices. "Besides," Lila continued, turning in Gideon's embrace to face him, "you promised to finish the playroom shelving today. Those toy baskets won't organize themselves." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Too early for Evelyn's scheduled visit, Gideon released Lila reluctantly and went to answer, returning moments later with unexpected guests, Eleanor and Richard Winters, Clara's parents, who had gradually warmed to their unorthodox family arrangement. "We were in the area for Richard's medical appointment," Eleanor explained, her attention immediately captured by Milo's enthusiastic greeting. "We hoped we might steal a few minutes with our grandson." "You're always welcome," Gideon assured them, his genuine welcome reflecting the improved relationship that had developed since their initial disapproval. "We're just having breakfast if you'd like to join us." As they settled around the table, the dynamics of their blended family were on full display. Lila serving pancakes to Clara's parents, while Gideon helped Ivy with small pieces of fruit. The scene that might once have seemed impossible had become their normal. Acceptance gradually replacing judgment as both sets of grandparents witnessed the stability and love permeating the household. Gideon divided his time between caring for Milo and managing his architectural practice from the home studio, carefully balancing client meetings with family responsibilities. His current project, restoring a historic downtown building, had gained attention from a prestigious design magazine, bringing new commissions despite his reduced schedule. Conversation flowed easily until Eleanor mentioned their encounter with Evelyn Bennett at their hotel restaurant the previous evening. "She seemed quite interested when we mentioned our visit today," Eleanor noted with careful neutrality. "Asked several questions about your arrangement." Lila and Gideon exchanged concerned glances. Though Evelyn had adhered to the visitation schedule established by the court, her disapproval remained evident in subtle comments and pointed questions during each visit. "Did she seem upset about something specific?" Lila asked, maintaining a casual tone despite her concern. "Not upset," Richard clarified, his typically reserved manner softening as Milo grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "More investigative. Mentioned something about discussing mutual interests." The cryptic statement hung in the air as breakfast concluded. After the Winters departed with promises to return the following weekend, Lila voiced the concern that had been building since their revelation. "What do you think Evelyn is planning?" she asked as they cleared the table together, the babies contently playing in their adjacent activity centers. "I'm not sure," Gideon admitted, his expression thoughtful, "but Catherine mentioned Evelyn requested additional documents about our household arrangement last week. She might be building toward another custody challenge." The possibility sent a familiar anxiety through Lila, the fear that their hard-won stability remained vulnerable to external judgment and legal intervention. Before she could respond, the doorbell announced Evelyn's precisely punctual arrival. Lila opened the door with practiced composure, greeting her former mother-in-law with polite civility. Evelyn entered with characteristic elegance, her designer outfit and perfectly coiffed hair contrasting with the comfortable domesticity of the household. Her gaze swept the living area with assessing precision before landing on Ivy. "There's my handsome girl," she crooned, her severe features softening as she approached her. Ivy, now familiar with her regular visits, offered a hesitant smile that Lila noted contained traces of Owen's dimpled grin. The scheduled visit proceeded with established routine. Evelyn engaged with Ivy while Lila remained nearby, their interaction cordial but guarded. The unexpected deviation occurred when Gideon entered with Milo after changing his diaper. "Mr. Holt," Evelyn acknowledged with unusual directness, "might I have a word with you privately?" The request, unprecedented during her previous visits, caused Lila instant concern. Gideon's questioning glance received her subtle nod, better to understand whatever Evelyn was planning than remain in uncertainty. As they moved to Gideon's study, Lila distracted herself with Ivy's increasingly mobile exploration, though her attention remained divided. When they returned 15 minutes later, Gideon's expression revealed nothing, while Evelyn appeared surprisingly subdued. The remainder of the visit continued without reference to their private conversation, though Lila noticed a shift in Evelyn's demeanor, less rigid disapproval, more contemplative observation of the household dynamics. When she departed, her goodbye to Ivy seemed particularly emotional, her typically composed features momentarily vulnerable. The moment the door closed behind Evelyn, Lila turned to Gideon with undisguised concern. "What happened in that conversation?" Gideon's response surprised her completely. "She wanted to know if I intend to marry you." The blunt statement momentarily robbed Lila of response. Marriage was a topic they had deliberately avoided, both still wearing wedding rings from their previous unions, both cautious about formalizing a relationship born in such unconventional circumstances. "What did you tell her?" Lila finally asked, heart racing unexpectedly. "The truth," Gideon replied simply. "That we're committed to our family, but haven't discussed legal formalization. That we're focused on creating stability for the children rather than conforming to external expectations about relationship timelines." His answer, diplomatic yet honest, reflected their carefully considered approach to building life after devastating loss. "How did she respond to that?" "With surprising thoughtfulness," Gideon admitted, settling beside her on the sofa as both babies played on their activity mat. "She said something that actually made sense. That public perception will eventually affect the children, regardless of our personal feelings about social conventions." The observation, coming from Evelyn, carried unexpected wisdom beneath its judgment. Their unconventional household, however functional and loving, existed within a social context that would eventually impact Ivy and Milo as they grew older and more aware. "She also said something else," Gideon continued, his expression softening, "that Owen would have wanted you to be happy even in his absence. That while she struggles with the timeline, she recognizes that our household provides Ivy with stability and love." The acknowledgement, however reluctantly given, represented a significant evolution in Evelyn's perspective, from outright rejection to tentative acceptance of their family configuration. "What changed?" Lila wondered aloud. "She's been so adamantly opposed to our relationship from the beginning." "I think her conversation with the Winters affected her more than we realized," Gideon suggested. "Eleanor mentioned they discussed their initial reactions to our arrangement and how witnessing the household functioning changed their perspective. The possibility that the two sets of grandparents had found common ground in their shared concerns, and perhaps shared eventual acceptance, presented an unexpected pathway toward extended family harmony none of them had anticipated. That evening, after settling both babies, Lila and Gideon retreated to the back porch with cups of tea, watching the stars emerge in the clear spring sky. Their conversation returned to Evelyn's pointed question about marriage. "We haven't talked about it," Lila acknowledged, curling her feet beneath her on the porch swing. "Marriage, I mean." "No," Gideon agreed, his thoughtful gaze on the emerging constellations. "I think we've both been avoiding the topic." The admission created space for honest exploration of a subject they'd carefully circumnavigated. "Part of me feels it's too soon," Lila confessed. "That formalizing our relationship somehow diminishes what we had with Owen and Clara." "I understand," Gideon replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "I still introduce myself as Clara's husband sometimes, when meeting new clients. The identity became so fundamental that relinquishing it feels like another loss." The simple acknowledgement of their complex emotional landscape created intimacy deeper than physical connection. They sat in comfortable silence, the porch swing moving gently beneath them, until Gideon spoke again. "But I've been thinking lately that perhaps marriage isn't about replacing what we lost, but honoring what we found. This unexpected family that helps us all heal." The perspective resonated with Lila's evolving understanding of their relationship. Not a replacement for what death had stolen, but something new, built from shared understanding of profound loss. "I don't need legal documentation to know what we are to each other," she said softly. "But," Evelyn raised a valid point about the children. "As they grow older, having clarity about our family structure would provide security." Gideon turned to face her directly, moonlight illuminating his serious expression. "I'm not proposing, not tonight, not like this," he clarified. "When that conversation happens, it should be solely about us, not external expectations or legal considerations." The distinction mattered. Their relationship deserved deliberate care rather than reactive formalization. "Agreed," Lila replied, leaning against his shoulder as they continued their gentle swinging. "We've never taken the conventional path anyway." "No," Gideon agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our story began in a cemetery in the rain. Traditional timelines were never our destiny." The following Sunday brought unexpected development. Evelyn arrived for her scheduled visit, accompanied by Eleanor Winters. The two grandmothers, having apparently formed a tentative alliance through their shared interest in their grandchildren's welfare, explained. "We thought perhaps a joint activity might be beneficial for everyone," Eleanor said, producing a photo album dedicated to cataloging both babies' development. A visual history for Ivy and Milo to share as they grow up together. The gesture, clearly planned between them, represented bridge building none of them had anticipated. As the afternoon progressed, Lila observed Evelyn gradually relaxing her rigid disapproval, engaging with both babies while sharing stories about Owen's childhood with evident emotional openness. When the grandmothers departed together, making plans for their next joint visit, Gideon wrapped his arm around Lila's shoulders. "I believe we just witnessed a minor miracle," he observed with quiet amazement. "Not a miracle," Lila corrected gently. "Just healing beginning to spread beyond our immediate family circle. Grief connecting rather than isolating." Their shared understanding of this subtle but significant shift exemplified what had drawn them together initially. The capacity to recognize healing within pain, connection within loss, and possibility within devastation. That night, as they moved through their evening routine, Gideon paused while organizing the kitchen. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding the children's sense of security," he began. "Unusually hesitant. About formalizing our family structure." Lila looked up from the baby bottle she was preparing for morning, attention captured by his serious tone. "I'd like to adopt Ivy," he continued carefully, "and for you to adopt Milo. Not immediately, but when the time feels right. Legal recognition of the parental roles we're already fulfilling." The proposal, more significant than marriage in many ways, acknowledged the profound bonds that had developed between each of them and the other's child. Lila considered how naturally Ivy reached for Gideon each morning, how instinctively she responded to Milo's particular cry in the night. "Yes," she agreed without hesitation. The rightness of this evolution immediately apparent. They deserve that security, the knowledge that they're fully claimed by both of us, regardless of biological connection. As they sealed this profound commitment with a gentle kiss, their embraced future felt not like a replacement of what they'd lost, but a transformation of parallel tragedies into unexpected joy. A family forged in shared grief that had somehow found its way to genuine wholeness. Chapter 10. Full Circle. The garden exploded with spring blossoms, fruit trees dotting the landscape with white and pink flowers that drifted like snow in the gentle breeze. 1 year had passed since Lila and Gideon's chance meeting in the cemetery. A year of profound transformation neither could have imagined during those first raw days of grief. Lila stood on the back porch, watching Gideon install the final piece of playground equipment they'd designed together. A toddler swing set with seats for both Ivy and Milo, who were now pulling themselves up and taking tentative steps with increasing confidence. "Perfect timing," Gideon called, securing the last bolt. "They'll be ready for these by summer." His foresight, always planning for the children's developmental milestones, was among the countless qualities that had endeared him to Lila over their months together. They had settled into a partnership with surprising ease, their complementary strengths creating stability neither had thought possible after such devastating losses. As Gideon crossed the garden toward her, Lila felt the familiar flutter of appreciation that had evolved from gratitude to friendship to love. Their relationship had developed with deliberate care, each step forward taken with conscious awareness of the grief that had connected them initially. "The winner's confirmed for dinner tonight," she informed him as he climbed the porch steps. "And Evelyn asked if she could bring her famous chocolate mousse." "Miracles never cease," Gideon replied with a small smile, brushing dirt from his hands. The gradual thawing between their respective in-laws had been among the most unexpected developments of recent months. A tentative alliance built on shared interest in their grandchildren's welfare. Inside, both babies napped peacefully, their synchronized schedule a hard-won victory that provided precious quiet moments in otherwise bustling days. Lila and Gideon settled at the kitchen island with coffee, reviewing plans for the memorial garden they'd designed together. "The landscape crew starts Monday," Gideon confirmed, spreading blueprints across the counter. The project, transforming the far corner of their property into a peaceful garden dedicated to Owen and Clara, represented their commitment to honoring what came before while building something new. "I think they would approve," Lila said softly, tracing the outline of the circular design featuring plants significant to both their late spouses. Wildflowers for Clara's conservation work, rare botanical specimens for Owen's literary interests. "They would," Gideon agreed, his hand covering hers atop the plans. "Not just of the garden, but of everything we've created together." The assertion reflected their evolving perspective on grief and healing, that moving forward honored rather than betrayed their previous loves, that building new joy didn't diminish past happiness. Their quiet moment was interrupted by simultaneous cries through the baby monitor. With synchronized movements born of months of co-parenting, they rose together, dividing responsibilities without discussion. Gideon to prepare bottles while Lila retrieved the babies from their cribs. Later, as afternoon sun bathed the living room in golden light, they sat on the floor, watching Ivy and Milo explore their surroundings with increasing mobility and curiosity. Milo had developed Clara's determined focus, examining objects with intense concentration before methodically testing their properties. Ivy, true to Owen's legacy, approached the world with enthusiastic energy, more interested in overall experience than specific details. 1 year ago today, Gideon noted, breaking their comfortable silence. "We met in the cemetery." The anniversary had occupied Lila's thoughts throughout the day, how profoundly their lives had transformed since that rain-soaked encounter between two devastated new parents. From parallel tragedy to intertwined healing, their journey defied conventional timelines, yet felt undeniably right. "I've been thinking about appropriate commemoration," Lila admitted. "It seems wrong to celebrate the anniversary of meeting at our spouses' graves, yet what's grown from that moment deserves acknowledgement." Gideon reached for her hand, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we visit them first, honor where our journey began, then celebrate where it's brought us." The suggestion perfectly captured their approach to building new life amid grief, not erasing what came before, but integrating loss into a narrative that included both sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings. That evening, after settling the babies with Beatrice's capable assistance, they returned to Oakwood Cemetery as golden hour cast long shadows across the grounds. The parallel graves that had once represented unbearable loss now existed as sacred markers of lives deeply loved rather than sources of active pain. They stood together between the headstones, each placing fresh flowers. Wildflowers for Clara, literary roses for Owen, in simple acknowledgement of continued remembrance. No words were necessary between them. Their shared understanding transcended verbal expression. "They brought us together," Lila said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. "In the most unexpected way, their absence created space for us to find each other. Not replacement," Gideon added, completing her thought as he often did, "but continuation. Different love, equally valid." As they walked hand in hand from the cemetery toward the restaurant where they'd planned dinner, Lila noticed the contrast between this visit and their first encounter. Grief still present but no longer all-consuming. Memories bittersweet rather than devastating. At the small Italian bistro Gideon had selected, they were shown to a corner table illuminated by candlelight. The intimate setting allowed private conversation despite the restaurant's busy atmosphere. "Have something for you," Gideon said after they ordered, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Not what you might think," he added quickly, noting her startled expression. Inside the box lay a delicate gold pendant featuring two intertwined circles, one containing Ivy's birthstone, the other Milo's. The symbolic representation of their blended family brought unexpected tears to Lila's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, lifting the necklace with reverent fingers. "Our family, connected, but distinct." Gideon fastened the pendant around her neck, his touch lingering against her skin. "I've been thinking about what you said about appropriate commemoration," he continued, "and I realize that while our beginning was unconventional, what matters is the intentional choices we've made since then." His eyes held hers across the candlelight, depths of emotion visible in their hazel warmth. "I'm not rushing or pressuring," he clarified, "but I want you to know that when you're ready, whether that's months or years from now, I'd like to make our family official in all possible ways." The carefully worded statement, not quite a proposal but a clear declaration of intent, reflected perfect understanding of their unique circumstances. Marriage remained complex territory for both of them, each still processing the abrupt severance of previous vows through death rather than choice. "I'm nearly ready," Lila admitted, the honest assessment surprising even herself. "Not because I've stopped loving Owen, but because loving you doesn't diminish what came before. Different chapters of the same life, equally authentic." Gideon's hand found hers across the table, their fingers intertwining in familiar connection. "We'll know when the time is right," he affirmed. "No external timelines or expectations, just what feels honest for our journey." Their anniversary dinner evolved into a celebration of unexpected joy found amid devastating loss. Recognition that grief had somehow transformed into a pathway toward connection neither could have anticipated in those early days of raw pain. Returning home, they found both babies peacefully asleep under Beatrice's watchful care. After her departure, they stood together in the nursery doorway, watching their children's rhythmic breathing in the soft glow of nightlights. "Sometimes I worry they won't remember," Lila whispered, voicing the concern that occasionally haunted quiet moments. "That Ivy will have no memory of Owen. That Milo will never know Clara except through photographs and stories." "They'll know them through us," Gideon replied with quiet certainty. "Through the values we carry forward, through the memory boxes we've created, through the garden we're building, and someday through the stories we'll tell about how their other parents brought us together, even in absence." The perspective provided comfort against the inevitable loss of direct connection between children and their departed parents. They had built mechanisms for remembrance. Photographs prominently displayed throughout the house, regular visits to the cemetery, deliberate references to Owen and Clara in daily conversation. Later, as moonlight filtered through bedroom curtains, they lay facing each other in the comfortable intimacy they'd gradually developed. Physical connection had evolved alongside emotional bond. Tentative at first, then increasingly confident as trust deepened between them. "What are you thinking?" Gideon asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About circles," Lila replied, her fingers tracing the contours of his face with gentle appreciation. "How life sometimes brings us back to beginnings, but transformed by the journey between." Their first meeting in the cemetery had represented absolute ending. Dreams shattered, futures destroyed, hope extinguished by parallel tragedies. Yet 1 year later, they had somehow constructed new dreams, different futures, unexpected hope from those same tragic beginnings. "We should visit the cemetery on the babies' birthdays," Gideon suggested, understanding her reference without explanation. "Complete the circle." Acknowledge where we began and how far we've traveled. The suggestion perfectly captured their approach to honoring the past while embracing the present. Integration rather than separation. Continuity rather than replacement. "I love you," Lila whispered. The words still relatively new between them, but increasingly natural. They had exchanged the declaration just months earlier, each conscious of its significance given their previous marriages. "I love you too," Gideon replied, drawing her closer against him. Not instead of Clara, but in addition to her. Different love, equally true. The distinction had become fundamental to their relationship. Rejection of either-or paradigms in favor of a both-and understanding that allowed space for multiple truths, multiple loves, multiple forms of family. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Lila contemplated the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From devastating parallel losses to unexpected shared joy, from chance encounter between grieving strangers to deliberate creation of a blended family, their story defied conventional narratives about grief and healing, about appropriate timelines for connection after loss, about traditional family formation,